Absolutely. Yeah. So our guest today is Qaalfa Dibeehi. Welcome, Alpha.
Thanks.
Great to have you on. So look, our topic today is heavily focused around, agentic AI. We're talking a bit about synthetic personas today. Some real interesting topics happening in the world right now. And I guess the best place to start, Alpha, is really just on agentic AI for customers specifically. But I guess before we get into that, maybe you can tell us a bit, Alpha, about yourself and what you're currently doing at Human to Outcome.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a CX guy with a foundation in computational neuropsychology. So my first career was in that. I got into consulting, and that's when CX was taking off in the mid 90s, and I've been in that space ever since. So I'm not a techie person, but I approach it from those two angles. Currently, I'm with a firm called Human to Outcome. What we do is transformation. We're a transformational business, and we kind of help organizations move from compliance frameworks to belief frameworks. So in other words, if you're moving, say, into digital, or you're moving into CX, or you're moving into any of these sustainability, these kinds of things, you can set it up such that people are following because they have to, otherwise they get hit over the head with a stick. We take those companies from the compliance frameworks to the place where people are motivated and inspired to work in those areas. And obviously AI is one of those areas that people are often afraid of in the general workforce. And so we get people to understand and to not be afraid and to take advantage and to see it as opportunity more than threat.
Is this an opportunity or a hindrance, right? Because you've been in this research space for quite a long time, and I work in big organizations doing research and along the lines of CX specifically. But now we have AI just evolving so quickly with tools emerging like UX AI and synthetic humans. How do you feel about that entering the space? Is that diminishing research, or is it enhancing it?
Well, to your first question, is it threat or opportunity? Is both. The thing, it's here. So if you're not with it, it's a threat. If you're with it, then it can be an opportunity. In research, again, it's going to change the way we do research. And I see, just on our topic of synthetic personas, I see 6 levels. We're literally at the first level in these 6 levels. So the 6 levels are, first, there's sort of one-time build training, one-time training data build synthetic personas. I think we're kind of using those currently. The next level is real-time evidence-based dynamic personas. So the data feed is coming in from all different data sources, customer comments and all your quant data and all that sort of stuff. I think we're at the experimental sort of bridging that phase. Then we get into the agentic personas. Again, those same 2 sort of things, real-time, one-time builds or real-time. The difference there, of course, is the agentic personas have decision-making and action-taking as part of what they're doing. And then finally, we have the embodied agents, human embodied agents and robot embodied agents. We're far from that. But I think when we get there, that's when the research actually gets into the physical stores and not just digitally online. So I think that's where we are, and that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and specifically on the research topic, because this is something that is quite hot right now, because there's 2 types of synthetic personas that we're kind of seeing. There's the ones that you initially start your research with. They might not have a lot of context of the business, but you can ask questions. They're not real customers or using real customer data. But then there's the other types of synthetic personas, which are more based on, your segmentation, your company's data, transactional history, all those kind of things that you have, right? Where you can then prompt and ask questions about those specific personas or segments that you might have in your ecosystem. How do you feel about both of those different types of synthetic personas, Qaalfa, and how do you feel that, we're evolving in that area?
I'm not sure. I kind of see those as kind of the same. I just group, if you have a one-time build, depending on the maturity of the data in your company and how you manage the data, that's just a level of maturity, I think. But in terms of using that data into a persona, that's levels above the traditional personas, which were, these paper-based stories of a kind of a customer that maybe a designer would use, but then after that it's dropped and you don't use it again. I think now with the synthetic personas and the second type, the broad type, I think we're now able to have these conversations. It's possible. The validity of them is still can be questioned, but you kind of have a choice here. You kind of have the cost concept, and then you have the validity concept. You know, in standard stats, when you have say a small sample size, you don't have enough money to go after and create the bigger sample size. You bootstrap. Well, this kind of gives us a bootstrap, you know, on steroids in a sense for the data that you do have. So I think it's a giant step. It's useful as long as we understand that it's not the real customer. But you have to make these choices. I think all of us, you know, if you're in this space, you know that everyone would like to have the research done in full extreme and do all the steps, you know, add the 6 weeks into the project to do it. But we also know that rarely happens. So to bridge that gap, I think this is where these synthetic personas kind of step in, and I think it's useful when done right.
That's interesting because you mentioned as long as we understand that they're not our customers, right? And one thing that's really kind of concerning me about all of these kind of new synthetic customer apps that are kind of coming out is their promise of accuracy. So if you look at all of their websites and their value propositions, one of the key ones, there's two key ones. The first is price, we'll do it cheaper and faster. The second is we'll do it as accurate or more accurate than you do today with actual people. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, can these systems really get that accurate, or are they limited?
No. The first, is it cheaper? Yes, it's definitely cheaper. Is it, if I hear any company today saying their synthetic personas are the same as humans, immediately I stop the conversation. I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
There's a trade-off that you're making. But I wouldn't also say that, you know, if you have a choice of not doing it and using a synthetic, obviously you use the synthetic. There are more valid or more accurate synthetic personas, and you know, the more work you put into it, the more, you know, it's like anything else. But no, I would always have the disclaimer that this was, and I'd always make it clear that what we're doing, you know, in the testing phase, is we use synthetic personas to kind of get across that. Now, for the skeptics in the company, the moment they hear that, you've given them ammunition to tell you why all of your work is not useful for them if they didn't want to do it in the first place. So I think it's just where we are as as society, as professionals, and how we want to, the politics of it is very different than the data management and the statistics and the accuracy of it. I think that's a different kind of a question. That's kind of where we kind of help with some organizations, because many people, obviously, they don't want to do the work in the first place, right? They don't want this kind of thing in the first place. So any of these things they just use as a critique and a crutch to kind of sideline it. Yeah.
Just to kind of double click on that point around accuracy. So AI has a bit of a bad reputation to be kind of overly positive in its answers. And I'm presuming that's going to be the same issue that we're going to encounter with these synthetic humans. How can we get around that to kind of ensure that we are getting a rounded view from our synthetic customers?
I think this is where the professionals come in. Hallucinations are also a part of it, and even with synthetic personas. So I think the professionals understand these limitations, these risks, which is why it won't be the same as the humans. However, having said that, if we're learning what it does, how it does what it does, just like if you're an amateur user of any of these LLMs and you're asking it questions, you understand that it's giving an answer, not necessarily the answer. And I think that's the framework that I use and get people to understand that. This is great. We can have confidence in it, but like all of statistics, we never prove truth. We approach it. And there's always room for these errors that can happen. And as long as we have a way of accounting for that error and understanding that that's just part of the system, then I think we move forward from there.
Yeah, I like that point, because when you talk about the professionals, it feels like that's almost the new role of research, to make sure that it's accurate, make sure we're keeping the data up to date of these synthetic personas, making sure that any qualitative insights get kind of fed into the system. And maybe that's the future role of what research is kind of going into, right? It's maintaining and aligning and making sure that all that data is there, so that we can use it to work with our customers, right, and get that data.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's not that different. I mean, you work with real humans. You're not working with the entirety of your customer population. You're working with some subsegment or, whatever. There's error in that, so it's the question here is not. I think it's a wrong thing to start thinking about it in terms of 100% accuracy, because that's just not going to happen. But I do think we start thinking about, is it helpful for the objectives that we're going for with the budget and the time limitations and the talent limitations or whatever we might have. If it serves those purposes, go for it. If you have big budget and you can actually do real human research, ethnography, whatever else, go for it. But if you don't, and most of us will face situations, I don't care how big your company is, where you don't have that, then I think we now have a tool that allows us to move forward without pure 100% finger in the air guesswork. And I think that's where this is beautiful.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that kind of leads into the next question around privacy, right? Because the more we're feeding our systems with this customer data, the more we're kind of enabling LLMs to start, prompting them and asking them questions. That topic of privacy becomes quite a challenge, right? And I know it's already a problem in today's day. What do you think, Qaalfa, are the things that we should be considering, and how can we overcome some of those privacy challenges that we might see?
I think it's a major risk, and it's one that's hidden until you breach it. And once you breach it, everyone's going to jump up. Before you breach it, no one cares. That's what it will feel like to organizations. And I think as we move forward, we need more data. And if you talk about synthetic or agentic personas, there's one thing about the macro data, and we're just kind of working on at that level. But the usefulness and the utility that if you were to ask a person, would you didn't talk about how you got there. You just talked about what you could do. I think most people love what it could do on a positive side. But if you had to explain to them what it would take to get there, then they would probably have some issues. However, we are all maturing in our understanding levels of acceptance to what we consider our own personal privacy. I mean, how much we give, just using a mobile phone, how much we give, how much we're being watched, monitored is unbelievable. Most people really don't appreciate it unless something happens and then suddenly it switches. So I think the onus is, in a sense, on the organizations to kind of stay ahead of that game and estimate, because we don't know. You have to estimate this, and I think part of that goes into the persona itself, right? What level of monitoring can you take? I think the kind of data that I'm talking about that would make this closer, if you talk about the accuracy, ability of the personas, the type of things that is, we heard something like tone of voice before, all the oral things, there's the visual things, there's going to be behavioral things, and behavioral things not just right in front of you. As we get into Internet of Things, potentially at some point, these things are connected. I go into the store, it happens to know my diet, it happens to estimate I'm going to be this size in 6 months' time. It's going to be all kinds of things that possibly we can bring to it, and that might be useful if I'm really interested in it, and it might be extremely intrusive if I found out, or if untoward actors somehow break in, and that will happen, and then use this data and use these things for other purposes. So I think it's a huge risk, but I think we're all. If we went back 20 years and talked about privacy and what we would accept, it's definitely different than today what we accept, and it will be definitely different than tomorrow from what we accept. So,
don't we give enough already? Like, we're opting into so many different things. So every app has a T's and C's. Everything that we watch on TV or online, whatever. What you're describing sounds as though we're going to have to give 10x more to these systems. How do companies go about doing that in order to really kind of enrich their personas and, again, get to that level of accuracy where they can actually action something?
I think we do it the way, or it is done the way it has been done. You push the boundaries, and you just go. Companies will go for it. You see an opportunity. I think people in this audience, you've been charged with some task, some objective to get to it. You see that you could increase whatever KPI by X% if you had that piece of information. You know, where's the line? You know, this is where the professional judgment kind of comes in. I don't think there is a specific line. I definitely don't think T's and C's solve it, because none of us really, I mean, even the professionals, I mean, you can ask this in any conference, are you reading the T's and C's to get to the app to sign? Just check the thing and you move on. And I think that's by and large. So the company has protected itself. We are not checking that. We don't have time, energy, and effort to do that. So this is, and it doesn't solve anything to say that you've signed up for the T's and C's. In fact, that's almost has a negative effect on most people. So I don't think that is legally, maybe it's the right approach. Socially, it's not the right approach. We have to get to a place where we're understanding roughly, and I think this is where the trust in the business, from a CX point of view, there's a permission, and permission here doesn't mean the data, it's a permission in a relationship that I'm giving you and I trust you enough that you protect whatever you're getting from me, because it might not be you, it might be that actor who's gotten into it. I trust you enough that you're looking out for my concerns. And I, frankly, looking at what's happening in many parts of the world where I'm from today, you can clearly see that organizations are not at all concerned about their customers. At all. And this is something that's going to have a backlash. And I think in 2027, we'll start to see a reversal of that. But that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you talk there about two parts, because I feel like, just quoting what Brenton was saying, there's the macro and there's the micro, right? The macro, we always look at it as the companies are doing these things with our data. They're using our data, but actually the micro is that individual. It's that person going after a KPI, right? It's like using that bit of data about that customer to kind of drive some value that they're doing, right? I guess there's then this question of ethics for us as designers or people that are working in products and tech, right? That should we be really a bit more responsible in how we're orchestrating and using that customer data, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Each of us has to have our own line, you know, pay your mortgage versus protect, you know, don't cross your principles. That is a gap. And then depending on where you work, organization, geography, you know, other kinds of things, how much are you willing to risk to pay the mortgage bit to stick up for your principles? How much are you willing to throw away your principles to keep paying your mortgage or to get a bigger house? That's a personal decision. But we clearly seeing, again, in some parts of the world where I'm from, where people have made that decision, I think, in a way that's going to haunt them in their career moving forward. So I think it is incumbent upon each of us to understand our own personal principles. And when you see your company doing things that, you know, you may not know, you may not be in a position to know all the details, but I think we have to be not just designing and innovating, but we also have to be the hand raisers, like, I'm questioning this. And usually, you know, many times that's enough. If we're afraid to be seen as the troublemaker, the you know, not advanced, I think that's already the sign that the company is probably culturally in a way that's going to cross many red lines. And the more you accept that, you have cognitive dissonance. You either have to change your beliefs or change your practices. One of those two, over the long haul, has to happen. So yeah, I think to your question, we as professionals have to really think about our own personal values, about privacy, about any of these kinds of things, and where is that line, and what does it mean, the work that I'm doing, which may literally, you know, hit that KPI, knock it out of the park, but I have to sell a bit of my soul. And I think, as someone said yesterday, you know, we need to give a bit of ourselves in our work, or a lot of ourselves in our work. And I think that means not just intellectually, it's a thing that part of our soul has to be there. So
how do you do that confidently? Like you mentioned about effectively being not a whistleblower, but just standing up for what you believe in publicly with the organization. How do you do that with confidence?
So first of all, let me just say, whistleblower is a very strong thing, and most of us are super afraid of being a whistleblower because it kind of affects your career forever. I just mean a hand raiser. Like you see something, you say something. Just that. Just that by itself is worth a lot. Do I think it's easy? No, but I think we have to learn, and I would say in any organization, and I would say if you're a team leader or a manager of people, this is where diversity of perspective, the power of diversity of perspective, simply having people with different points of view about the thing, whether it be because they're from cultural backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds, whatever it is, simply having that mix in the room and then having, you know, the quote unquote psychological safety of having those people allowed to say what they, and you encourage it, I think that's the start of this. So without that, of course, there's going to be one or two people who have the heart to do it. But most people are a little bit quiet. So I would say, if you value diversity of perspective, if you honestly, not intellectually, if you honestly value it, if you are the leader in the room, you're moving forward, and someone comes up with that, and they are the hand raiser, can you accept that? Do you encourage that? If that happens with you, then I think you're on the right path. That's my point of view.
On that note of diversity, right, or kind of diverse thinking, going back to the synthetic humans side of things, how do we get that into the system? Because there's been a ton of issues around AI being skewed one way towards a majority of thinking, etc. How do we kind of factor in the minority of users that use our products as well?
So if you're saying this, I think there was the professor yesterday who was talking a bit about this. Clearly, you know, a lot of AI is being developed in the West and in China, quite a lot. And I think this area is developing some as well. And we also know that there is bias. There is bias baked into the training data. And one of the things I always say, and you know, if anyone disagrees, feel free to say when we get to the Q&A, but I think whenever you have AI, it magnifies whatever bias there is. It doesn't diminish it, it magnifies it. Absolutely 100%, I've not seen otherwise. It magnifies the bias, which means why we need people is because people, you need diversity, as I talked about before, because we need to be able to see that bias. It's difficult for me to see my own bias. We all have them. The data is things are biased because we see the world in a certain way and we built these things in a certain way. So the bias is there. The bias is in AI, just like the bias is in all of us. The thing with all of us is, I believe as humans, we have the innate ability to kind of have metacognition about it and then kind of work on ourselves in that way for a particular purpose. I think AI needs us to get there. It's not good with its own metacognition. And so I think this is where, you know, this is kind of getting a little bit philosophical, but I think, again, to the point, what's important for us is to keep our own humanity, and that own humanity means when we're looking at even the outcomes, it does what we ask it to do. We can see it with that lens and then understand where we, you know, we have that, we've seen bias or we observe bias. There was a case of a company, of a designer who noticed that all the designers were being rejected for jobs in the company. So the head of design of the company submitted his own CV to the system and the AI rejected him. He then had the entire HR department fired for over-relying on AI. And I think that's a danger that many of us need to be thinking about. Over-reliance. Someone mentioned yesterday laziness, human laziness, and we're all lazy. If we don't have to think about it, we don't do it. But I think we can over-rely on these things or believe that, become overconfident that it does what it does. I think for me, I always keep in mind that AI magnifies the bias. That's a bad thing to me. So I'm always looking at it, even though I'm not a fanboy, but I am a fan of AI. And I believe that it has inherent flaws, just like I believe every individual on my team, including me, have inherent flaws. So no matter what anyone says, it's not like it's perfect. And I don't think that changes because it's AI or it changes because it's human. I think that's just a way and a point of view that we should have.
One thing that I'm going to miss if we do fully go this way is actually one thing I love about research itself is just the unpredictability of humans. So I don't think I've been in a research study where I haven't been surprised, right? Like even if it's a mass study and it's one person that has come out with something like outstanding or something that just you never thought of before. My fear is that, back on that note, AI might be too perfect, and I'm not sure how we solve for that unpredictability of customer research that really does can move the needle and steer us towards innovation.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And for me personally, I feel like that's where, with some of the things we've been discussing, we can't stop doing the actual research, because it feels like if we do the actual research, speaking to customers, doing usability tests, when we find those surprising moments, right? That's where we then need to kind of feed those into our system so that it learns some of those things as well, right? Because AI is going to only be as strong as it's, the data we're kind of putting in. So yeah, just thinking about that, Jeff, it feels like we still have to keep the core concepts of research, still keep doing those surprising moments, right? And still making sure that we're then feeding that into these synthetic personas or systems like LMs, right? Mm.
I think, yeah, stopping human research is something I would never recommend. What I will say is the reality of what we do, as I said at the beginning, is that we're in organizations that are short on time, short on money, short on a lot of things. And oftentimes they stop or minimize the human research because there is no time or money. And I think where we're getting to is these synthetic, or if we get there, agentic personas allows us to move forward with something much better than what we currently do, which is kind of cut short. 2 focus groups and 1 interview, and the data that we have from 5 years ago, okay, just run with it. I think we're getting to a place now where we can get to something that's much better, is much more valid. It's not perfect, but it's in that line. So I think it's a practical solution versus an optimal solution for the problems of actually, in the business problems, I think.
Absolutely. So Alpha, you're also heavy on customer experience, right? And I think you spoke a bit about the omnichannel experience as well. From using agents potentially in stores, right? So when we identify a customer walking in the store, I always think about that classic movie Minority Report, right? Where he walks in the store and there's all this information about you when you kind of walk in. Are you seeing any of this being used currently today, or are we at a place yet where we're actually starting to develop some of these identifiers of customers and using AI to kind of build that in?
I have not seen it practically yet. So I did some work with one of the stores here, major store here. And like a lot of stores, they have personas. It was great. The personas look good. It's fantastic. But when you get to the staff now operating in the store, the problem is a person, customer X, walks through the door. They have no view of what persona that person is. I think, again, an area where I called it in my levels, this was the embodied agent. So imagine now this salesperson now has, I don't know, glass, whatever else it is, and the person walks in and it just reads a couple of signs off this person, the way they're dressed, their gait, their tone of voice, whatever else it is. And it kind of gives them a probability, this is probability persona 1. And based on the training that they've had, they kind of understand how to deal with that person. So privacy is one of the issues. What are we reading on that person? The second thing is interesting for me is what's the employee's role? Is it a salesperson? And I think we move to an area where instead of, if we get there, I think we're far from that. But if we get there, the salesperson will be hiring actors who get direction from agentic AI to become the embodied AI effectively. So I can understand how to deal with a particular persona. I'm very good at acting. I'm very good at taking direction. I'm very good at taking all these things on the fly and moving with it. So I think acting, in a sense, becomes a skill in that scenario. To your point, I don't think we're doing it now. I think we're far from doing it right now. But I think we're headed in that in that direction if some of these things can be solved. I mean, one of the basic problems is stability of personas. We're not even there yet. The ones where you take the one-time static training build, maybe that's closest to the most stable. If you get into the dynamic, real-time, evidence-based personas, that concept is because it's being fed, it's in a sense less reliable, but necessary to be stable on the old-time data. It's literally changing all the time because of the feed that's coming in. So I think that's kind of where we are. So I think we're far from it, but I think we're headed directly in that direction.
Yeah, and one of the challenges I see also is even if we identify a customer, it's that whole journey afterwards, right? And that's where like the service design aspect comes into it, because it's like once we know about that customer, how do we translate that to the store staff, knowing what they need to do, the training that store staff will need to say, okay, well, this is a high value customer, this is a low value customer, I don't need to spend as much time maybe with this customer, or if this is a new customer, that part is also going to be quite challenging, right? And kind of making sure that whole end-to-end journey works.
That part we have. I mean, in CX work right now, we have the idea, if you knew this was this type of person, we have, and I'm not talking about scripts, we have standards, behaviorals, journeys, we have all kinds of things we can train people on. The real difficulty right now, number one, is the motivation of the staff. So we need to change what it means to be a salesperson. You have the lowest person on the totem pole, you need to be motivated and all that. But the real thing is, again, how do I know, I've been trained on, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 personas and the experiences I should give them, how to talk to them, what to offer them, how to do this, how to do that. We can do all that right now. The difficulty is, how do you know? I have to have this long conversation with this person to find out, and that takes time, so it's not really practical. So I think if we can solve that, and I believe that the embodied agent concept is what potentially solves it. And getting there, if we're using synthetic personas or agentic personas to even help us understand how to do that, I think what the training is, you can think about simulations of the training. So now the simulations, you have this agentic persona that I'm dealing with, and I can train better. You can think about role plays in organizations with these embodied actors, as we described it. So I can now become persona X, and with the sales audience, the management, the whoever else, you're asking me questions, and I can be the embodiment of that. So I think that's kind of where we're headed. I literally think the biggest gap right now in terms of doing what we're talking about is just how do you identify it upfront in the first few seconds to kind of understand. Human to human, we see somebody, we get a feel, right, that looks like an interesting person. We look at people in the audience, we have our own persona framework, cool, probably a designer, this or that, young, old, whatever your framework is, we have that, we use it already. So we're just kind of saying we can let AI, and I think AI will be pretty good at this because even the emotional AI is kind of coming to the fore. So we're reading all of this kind of thing. With the privacy concern, kind of, I parked that one for a moment, but with that as well.
I think we've barely kind of scratched the surface, and it's been an amazing conversation with Qaalfa, and I could speak for hours about it. In fact, we have spoke for hours about this, but yeah, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. Do we have time for any questions from the audience? Or? I know we have designers and researchers in here, so feel free.
Thank you. That was a really interesting conversation. How do we avoid getting to a point where we're no longer learning from our users and more just determining the actions we want from them? And obviously then, as you said, Qaalfa, as businesses, we're always going to look for the cheapest way to extract value, and the more predictable behavior is, the cheaper it is to know then how to extract that value. One of those questions is about innovation, like when we lose those extreme users and those specific insights, but then also thinking about the world that we want to create and the world we want to be a part of. If it is businesses that are determining these behaviors, what can we really do as designers is one question, but then I guess, what do you see the future of this be?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it takes me to the purpose of persona even to begin with. So, we always had segments. So why do we need something called a persona? The whole point of the persona was to see the fuller person. It's not just, I'm not just here just to buy this product. You gave it, we had an even exchange, economics, rational utility kind of thinking. It was, I have a life, I have some things, I have a dream, I have other things. This is just part of it, maybe a small part, maybe a big part. And I think where I can see the benefit of this is that with AI, we can bring more of that story and the backstory into it, and the AI is kind of doing that. Your question, though, was how do we kind of prevent ourselves from kind of doing away with the human side of it and just kind of going with that? Again, I go back to, as professionals, this is where we have this hand-raising thing. If we see that going on too much, we have to be able to, not all of us are going to be in a position to stop it or start it in our organizations, but we have to be that person who raises a hand. Like, if we think this requires or needs or should have some human touch or whatever it is, then, a human in the loop, whether research-wise or human in the loop, professional-wise, whatever it is, I think we have to have that hand-raising ability. You won't always win, clearly, but if you never win, it's probably time to look for another job if that's your principle, if you talked about before. So I would think that's kind of the best answer I can give to that.
Is there a practical business case that we can put forward for?
To be honest, so whenever I talk about data, there's something that I always say, and this is a phrase, it's my mantra, my personal mantra, that if you talk about data, we tend to talk about quantitative data and quantitative evidence, and there's qualitative evidence as well. I have personally never seen a situation where using, and we say business case, most people immediately start thinking about we have some numbers to prove the thing. So I have never personally seen a case, quantitative case presented to an executive audience that causes them to change their mind. I have never seen it. I have always seen they ask for that. 100% they will ask for it, so you have to produce it. The only thing I have ever seen that works is you use qualitative data, which is a human story, which is the whole point of the persona in a sense, to inspire them to understand the significance of this thing. So the cases that I would say, before you even get to here's the facts and the figures of it, are here's the risks that we, and all you have to do is look at the States right now, and you see lots of companies that have jumped on certain bandwagons, and they're paying the price for that, and you'll see it much more in 2027, and so on and so forth. So I think these kinds of stories, which kind of show we have to be clear and authentic about what we stand for and what we believe. And also when talking to customers, there's an exchange here that goes on. It's not just the economic exchange. There's something that we're building a relationship. Is that true? If they say that's not true, then that's part of the answer. But if that is true, then we have to be cognizant and sensitive to more things than just, the obvious. So.
Nice. Thanks a lot. Good.